In the drowned courts beneath the jade canopy, beauty was never harmless. The nobles who lived there wore silk gloves not out of modesty, but caution. Their rings were edged with tiny fangs. Their necklaces carried venom in hollow pearls. Their goblets were tested by servants who rarely lived long enough to grow old. The court had been built upon old marshland, where pale roots drank from black water and glass flowers bloomed beneath lantern light. Every celebration held there was a negotiation. Every compliment concealed a wound. Every dance was watched as closely as a duel. Among them moved a woman whose name history refused to preserve. Some called her the Viper of the Jade Hall. Others called her nothing at all, because to speak too clearly of her was considered dangerous. She was not a soldier, not a sorceress, not an assassin in the crude sense. She carried no visible blade. She raised no hand in anger. She killed through timing, posture, breath, and attention. When she danced, the room leaned toward her. When she smiled, rivals forgot their defenses. When she bowed, someone's fate was already sealed. Her true weapon was admiration. Applause followed her wherever she performed, and with it came a strange sickness. Those who praised her too loudly found their hands trembling by dawn. Those who stared too long developed fevers. Those who tried to imitate her movements collapsed days later, their bodies marked by tiny blooms of green beneath the skin. The court adored her. The court feared her. And one man loved her art enough to misunderstand it completely. His name was Vaelor Syth, though later centuries would remember him only as the Serpentwright. He was an alchemist, but not the kind who brewed remedies for fevered children or tonics for aging kings. Vaelor studied venoms with the reverence priests gave to scripture. He believed poison was not merely a weapon, but a language of consequence. A blade, he thought, was vulgar. Blade ended too quickly. Blade announced itself. Poison was different. Poison could whisper. It could wait. It could teach the body to betray itself by degrees. Vaelor rejected swift death as wasteful. What fascinated him was not the killing blow, but the wound that continued to think after the weapon had withdrawn. A cut that became a fever that became clarity, a clarity that became surrender. He collected toxins from marsh serpents, jewel-backed insects, pale blossoms that opened only under moonlight, and fungi that grew in the mouths of drowned statues. But he gathered more than substances. He harvested moments. The hesitation before betrayal, the breath before a lie, the silence after a wound. He believed these invisible fragments carried their own chemistry. Fear had weight. Desire had temperature. Regret left a residue if one knew how to distill it. And so he watched the dancer. Not with lust alone, though desire was there. Not with envy alone, though envy sharpened him. He watched her because her movement proved his theory. Every step she took carried delayed consequence. Every gesture landed before its meaning arrived. Every wound she dealt was small at first. Then it bloomed. Vaelor began attending every performance. At first he stood among the lesser nobles beneath the mirrored balconies, his hands folded, his face unreadable. Later, he secured a place closer to the stage. Later still, he was invited into the private gardens, where the dancer practiced alone among glass reeds and perfumed mist. She knew he watched her too carefully.
Alchemists usually stare at bottles,
She told him one evening.
Only when bottles contain something worth studying.
He replied.
And do I?
You contain a principle.
She laughed at that, softly enough that the sound seemed designed to remain in the air. Vaelor studied the arcs of her wrists, the delay between step and turn, the precise moment when the audience stopped breathing. He saw how she invited attention, trapped it, and returned it sharpened. Her dance was not violence, it was placement. A soldier struck to overpower. She moved to arrange inevitability. From her, Vaelor learned what his venom lacked. His toxins lingered, but they did not perform. They harmed, but they did not understand timing. They entered the blood like invaders, rather than honored guests. He wanted a poison that behaved like applause, something that grew stronger through attention, something that rewarded precision over force, something that made even the smallest wound feel like the beginning of a verdict. To test his theories, Vaelor turned the needle upon himself. He began with diluted venoms, tracing shallow lines across his forearm and recording every sensation: heat, delay, numbness, tremor, clarity. He learned which mixtures clouded thought and which sharpened it, which slowed the pulse without weakening the hand, which made pain expand instead of fade. His notebooks filled with diagrams of nerves, veins, pulse points, and pressure paths. He wrote, "A wound need not be deep if it is exact." Then later, "The body becomes the accomplice of a precise enemy." And finally, "Force is the confession of an impatient hand." Vaelor abandoned the old alchemical pursuit of strength. He did not want to make a warrior hit harder. Hardness was crude. Hardness broke armor, shattered bone, announced itself with noise. He wanted certainty. A strike under his influence would lose some of its raw violence, but gain a more terrible authority. It would seed corruption in silence. It would let time perform the true work. A shallow puncture would not end a life, not at once. It would begin a conversation between venom and flesh, and the flesh would lose. The final mixture took 9 years. Vaelor brewed it beneath moonlight in a chamber lined with green glass. Into the alembic he poured venom from marsh serpents, resin from poisonous blossoms, crushed chitin from insects that fed on corpses, and a single drop of his own altered blood. Then came the stranger ingredients. A breath stolen from a condemned liar before confession. The silence gathered from a dueling room after the loser fell. A tear shed by a queen who had ordered the death of her only loyal servant. And last of all, the rhythm he had stolen from the dancer's motion, not literally, not magically in any simple sense, but translated through observation into measure, pulse, and delay. The liquid that formed was emerald and viscous. It did not steam, it did not hiss. It pulsed gently in the vessel, as though it had accepted the idea of life without becoming alive. Vaelor sealed it inside a curved flask shaped to fit the palm like a whispered agreement. Around its neck he fused 2 silver serpents, their bodies coiled in mirrored tension, their fangs sunk into the stopper. The dancer came to see it before the final sealing.
What will you call it?
She asked. Vaelor looked at the flask, then at the empty theater beyond the laboratory doors.
Not after you,
he said. Her expression did not change, but something cold passed behind her eyes.
No?
No. Names decay. Sound remains.
He lifted the vessel.
I will name it after what you desire most.
That night, the first title was given, the Viper's applause. But that was only the name the court remembered. Vaelor had engraved another name beneath the flask, hidden where only the bearer's fingers would touch it. The Serpentwright's oath. The dancer drank from the final vial before her last performance. No one knew whether Vaelor offered it to her, whether she stole it, or whether both understood that the work required an ending worthy of its design. The court gathered beneath green lanterns and mirrored ceilings. Nobles wore their finest masks. Musicians tuned instruments strung with silver gut. Servants moved like ghosts along the walls, careful not to breathe too loudly. When the dancer stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. She moved slower than usual. That was the first thing they noticed. Her earlier performances had been serpentine, swift, impossible to follow without surrendering to them. This dance was different. Each step seemed placed upon the floor with deliberate mercy. Each turn arrived late enough to make the audience hunger for it. Each gesture promised consequence and withheld it. Vaelor watched from the shadow of the western arch. He saw the draught working through her. Not as strength, not as frenzy, as precision. The dancer's hands cut the air. Her eyes found every face. Her smile moved across the crowd like a blade too thin to feel. The audience leaned closer. Every admirer became part of the mechanism. At the final note, she bowed. For one perfect moment, nothing happened. Then the court erupted. Applause thundered beneath the glass ceiling. Nobles rose to their feet. Rings struck palms. Sleeves flashed. The sound became a storm of approval, greed, worship, and fear. The dancer stood in the center of it, smiling. Then one throat closed, then another, then all of them. The applause broke into choking silence. Bodies collapsed across velvet benches and polished floors. Masks cracked beneath falling faces. Goblets rolled in widening circles of spilled wine. When Vaelor reached the stage, the dancer was gone. Only the flask remained, warm. After the massacre, the court tried to erase her. They burned portraits. They shattered statues. They forbade songs that matched the rhythm of her final dance. Those who survived by chance, servants in distant corridors or guards posted beyond the hall, claimed never to have seen her face clearly. Vaelor returned to his workshop alone. He was no longer celebrated as a genius. He was whispered of as a maker of elegant disasters. Warriors came to him in secret, asking for a draft that could make them unbeatable. Duelists wanted advantage. Assassins wanted perfection. Scholars wanted the formula. Vaelor refused most of them. Not because he had grown moral, because most were unworthy. They wanted poison to behave like a hammer. They wanted power without patience. They wanted death to hurry. When he did grant the draft, he demanded an oath. Strike not for speed, but for certainty. Waste no motion. Trust the wound. Let time finish what the hand begins. Those who understood became terrifying. Their blows appeared weaker than expected. Their enemies laughed at first, seeing only shallow cuts and narrow punctures. Then their knees softened, their breath shortened, their blood cooled. By the time fear arrived, the venom had already written its verdict. Yet Vaelor paid his own tithe. Years of testing had thickened his blood. His pulse slowed until each heartbeat felt like a chain dragged across stone. His limbs grew cold, but his mind sharpened unbearably. In his final hours, he did not seek aid. He recorded everything: the slowing of breath, the clarity behind the eyes, the strange dignity of decline. When his workshop was discovered, the notes were arranged in perfect order. The green glass vessels were sealed. The chair beside his desk was still warm. Only one object was missing: a mirror. Some believed he had taken it to watch his own final transformation. Others believed the dancer had returned for him. But those who later carried the flask gave another answer. They said the Serpentwright no longer needed a mirror. Everyone who drank from his oath became one. The flask passed from hand to hand through centuries of quiet violence. A disgraced duelist carried it beneath his coat and won 12 impossible challenges without ever striking twice. A temple assassin used it during the silent succession, killing 5 heirs with wounds so small their physicians blamed insects. A general discarded it after one battle, calling it useless because it did not make him stronger. His lieutenant recovered it and ended the war with a single patient campaign. Those who uncorked the vessel described the same sensation. The heartbeat slowed, the hand steadied. The world became a diagram of openings. Veins seemed to glow beneath skin. Breath became measurable. Distance folded into intention. The drinker felt no surge of power, no heroic fire, no savage hunger. Instead, they felt chosen by the wound before it was made. Every precise strike planted a seed. Every seed waited. Every waiting thing grew. The draft demanded discipline. Frenzy weakened it. Rage confused it. Heavy blows squandered its design. But a deliberate hand could draw from it a terrible music. A puncture beneath the ribs. A cut along the wrist. A kiss of steel near the throat. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. The wound always looked small. That was the promise. The oath was what followed. In later ages, many names were given to the vessel. the court's last ovation, the emerald verdict, the patient fang, the applause that kills. But the oldest inscription remained hidden beneath the curve of the glass, warmed by every hand that dared to hold it. The Serpentwright's oath. It was never a healing draught, never a blessing, never a simple poison. It was a contract between motion and consequence, between precision and decay, between the hand that strikes and the time that completes the strike. Those who carry it now still hear something when the stopper loosens. Not a voice, not a hiss, a memory of applause, distant and refined, a court rising to its feet, a dancer smiling beneath green light, an alchemist watching his theory become massacre, and beneath it all, the slow pulse of venom waiting to bloom. The flask does not ask whether its bearer is cruel, righteous, desperate, or afraid. It asks only one question: can you be patient enough to let the wound become inevitable? And if the answer is yes, the emerald liquid stirs. The serpents at the neck tighten. The oath begins again.